name's Jake. I wanted to tell you, make this message, because if anything happens to me and any of my friends, somebody needs to know what's going on. I can't tell you where I live or my last name. You just have to trust me that what I'm talking about is real. This is a real place, a real town. It may even be your town.
Welcome to Thoughtspeak, a podcast dedicated to the weekly discussion of K. Applegate's 1996 book series, Animorphs. My name's Coleman.
And I'm Mitchell.
Welcome to our first podcast. As I said, dedicated to reviewing and discussing every book in the Animorphs book series. It's a book series that we both read in our childhood through high school.
Not in high school. I think by high school I was a little too cool for reading books. So that's where I kind of dipped, and that's why I never finished the series in its initial run. I didn't actually finish reading the last couple of books until around 2009 when I was at film school with you. That's the first time I finished the series.
I think I just basically had a series of books that I would just cycle through. You had your Harry Potters, you had your Michael Crichton books, Dinotopia series I read when I was younger, the novelizations of that, and then I had the Animorphs books. So I would go out and buy new books as well, but I would always cycle back to, this first 5 to 10, the random 17. To be clear to our new listeners who are thinking that they're coming into a podcast of seasoned Animorph readers, that would be a lie.
Oh, yeah. There are books that both of us haven't even read yet, and that's why we're so excited to do this, is to read those books that we never got to read. All the side adventures and the filler that I deemed not worth reading in my initial run of the series. It's going to be great. Looking at you, Helmacrons.
But yeah. So we've both read pretty much all the K. Applegate written ones, and then there's just a huge section of ghost written ones that we both probably missed out on. And to any brand new listeners out there who are raring to pick up the first book and don't know anything about Animorphs, K. Applegate, the author, she wrote books 1 through 24, I believe, and then 25 through 31 were ghostwritten, or 32 were ghostwritten. Then she came back, wrote 33, and then 34 through 52 or 51 were also ghostwritten, and then she finished the series. And then all the side books were written as well by K. Applegate. So...
Right. Well, and you bring up a good point. If anybody is listening to this at home, I would highly encourage picking up your Animorphs book, whatever one we're talking about for the week, and reading along if you have that option, if you have the book available to you.
We'll be talking about the first book, The Invasion, today. A little later in the podcast, want to get you acquainted with your hosts. I don't know what you could guess our ages are from listening. I don't know anything about you,
13.
Dear listener. I assume we sound young or younger, but I think it's important to note that we are doing this podcast as adults in their late 20s who are socially equipped, have
I'm
steady...
26.
We're both 26.
I have a fiance.
I didn't want to... You're revealing too much. The Yerks are going to find us.
But I don't have a last name. It's important to note until you look at my bio.
Also note, I don't have a fiance, so that's noteworthy. But that no, I think that's important to say that we're both college educated adults who live in the real world. We pay bills, and we still thought it was worthwhile to go back,
re-examine the Animorphs series.
Yeah, and I think we've both we've already read the first book, and we've already started back into it, and I really still don't understand how this was so quick to be classified as I don't know what they classify as nowadays, an intermediate series or a young adult series.
I think it could be considered a young adult series by today's standards, considering the violence.
Yeah, I guess I just don't understand what it's like. I understand
like,
movie ratings. But with a young adult series, I mean, you got Ender's Game, you got the Animorphs, you got all these other books. There's genocide and war and guts hanging out and stuff. I don't know where the line is for books. I guess I don't know.
All right, well, let's get right into it. I want to talk about how I found the Animorphs books real quick. I started reading Animorphs back in 96, probably 97. I can't remember the exact year. I know I was in kindergarten in 92, but I digress. Anyway, it was Animorphs and Goosebumps that really kicked off my whole love of reading. And Goosebumps did come first, but Animorphs was right there, and they always had a way of gripping me more than the Goosebumps ever did. I think it was just because Animorphs was written so much more, intelligently. It was for kids, but it didn't seem like it was for kids, just based on the subject matter. I mean, it's just some really deep, dark stuff. My first run-in with the Animorphs books were at those Scholastic book fairs that used to come around to elementary schools. I don't know if they still do that at today's present elementary schools. Although I work in an elementary school, so I should figure that out.
I don't know when, do you know when, what grade you were when you started reading them, or?
It had to have been at least, I want to say 4th grade. I think 3rd and 4th grade was when I was really into Goosebumps, and probably 4th going into 5th is when I discovered the Animorphs books. And, I like I said, I'd seen them around at the Scholastic book fairs. The covers were always very intriguing to me because I really liked animals. Grew up with a kind of a crazy animal lady for a mom. So we were always getting like really exotic animals like raccoons, iguanas, squirrels, possums, goats.
Did you have a wildlife rehabilitation center in your backyard?
No, but my mom did have a children's kind of educational program, and I'm not kidding you, it was called Karen's Critters, and she used to go around to like schools, like elementary schools, and bring in possums and foxes and raccoons and squirrels for kids to play with.
Oh, it's not opossums, it's just possum.
It can be either. After I found the Animorphs books, that's really what got me into reading, and I've never truly forgotten that. And even when I went to college so many years later, when I found a friend who shared the same interest of the Animorphs book series that I did, that's how I knew we were going to make it. That's how I knew one day we'd end up here doing this podcast.
That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me.
It's the most romantic thing.
I don't know when exactly year-wise I started, but similar story, we'd always see them in the book fairs that came to the school, Belpre, Ohio Middle School, seeing other kids in class read them. I specifically remember when I was just reading the first books, I must not have started right at the beginning because of the publishing dates and stuff, because I remember seeing a classmate reading The Discovery, number 20, and asking him if I could read it, because I'd only read like the first 2 or 3, and he was kind of a douchebag and wouldn't hand it over. So other than that, I got most of mine at Walden Books, and I was kind of reading other things like you, Goosebumps, just other things of that nature. I think everybody read those 2 series in tandem.
Sideways Stories from Wayside School.
Oh my gosh. Oh, jeez. That was the greatest series. We should do a Sideways Stories from Wayside School podcast after we finish up this whole Animorphs thing.
Yeah. Let's just wrap this Animorphs thing up before we start talking about our sequel podcasts.
So yeah. Like everyone else in the world, Animorphs was one of my first book series. Was a huge impact on reading and just wanting to be a writer and everything else, even though I didn't really go the novelization route. But Animorphs definitely pushed me into that.
All right, cool. You want to hop right into it now? You want to get into it?
Yeah, okay.
Help! Wait! Help! Wait! Stop!
Their bodies were now hosts, harboring an alien form of life, a cosmic form, which to survive must take over every human man. So I ran.
They're after you! They're after all of us! Our wives, our children, everyone! They're here already! You're next! You're next! You're next! You're next!
So today, obviously, we're reading Animorphs #1, The Invasion. And the covers got a little boy transforming into a lizard. Spooky. Would you care to read us the back, sir?
Yes. For new listeners, which is everyone, we're going to, read the back of the books. It's the most nostalgic summary I could think of for each one before we jump into a discussion of the books and kind of, launch into a little review of each one. So, without further ado, here is the first summary for The Invasion, Animorphs book #1. Sometimes weird things happen to people. Ask Jake. He could tell you about the night he and his friends saw a strange light in the sky that seemed to be heading right for them. That was the night 5 normal kids learned that humanity is under a silent attack, and were given the power to fight back. Now Jake, Rachel, Cassie, Tobias, and Marco can transform into some of the most dangerous creatures on Earth. And they must use that power to outsmart an evil greater than anything the world has ever seen.
Whoa. So let's point this out right away. You are reading the reprinted version, the most recent one. Do you know when they started reprinting those?
I believe last year or a couple years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, that's irrelevant information. But anyway, the latest reprints feature new covers and some edited content. Specifically, what you just read, the back, was a little bit different from what I've got over here on the original book copy. Nothing too earth-shatteringly different, but...
Yeah, and I was going to point that out for everyone listening in. I made a point to... I've read The Invasion so many times. It's probably the one I've reread the most in my past, just like pretty much everyone else. So I wanted to actually... grab the reprint, see the changes, at least for the first book, and about halfway through reading that summary just now, I noticed it was pretty different. So, yeah, this is the first book. This is the starter to the series. Let's get into it. Let's see why it launched this pop culture phenomenon known as Animorphs.
Okay, so The Invasion starts out with the main cast of characters all getting together at the mall through various circumstances, which aren't entirely elaborated upon. The book starts out, it's narrated by Jake, the soon-to-be leader of the Animorphs, I think we'll be able to say without spoiling anything.
Obviously, we've got a lot of these starting chapters to go through with each podcast, most of which are just reiterating what happened in the last book, or...
Yeah, the Animorphs book series has a tendency to use the first 2 to 3 chapters kind of recapping what's been going on in the series. Although I'll give them that they do make them as entertaining as a recap can be.
Yeah, and I've always appreciated there's little character moments we have with whoever's narrating that we, right from the beginning, even start seeing a little more into who they are straight from the start. Which, because I mean, these are basically cold opens to try to entice you to buy the book. Standing in Barnes and Noble or whatever you're doing.
Well, and it does a good job of catching up readers who maybe haven't read the entire series or skipped a couple of books. I never felt like I didn't know what was going on in the plot of any of these books.
It's like a recap at the beginning of an episode of a TV show. They'll give you the parts that are pertinent to the book or TV show you're about to read or watch, where the hell you're doing.
Like all fiction or all great literature, this one starts at the mall. Well, right off the bat, we're introduced to Jake, the protagonist. Some would say probably the main character of the series. Jake's hanging out with his best friend Marco, who is beating him at video games, despite Jake owning a Sega at home.
In the reprint, he's playing a console, so I guess it would leave it up to us to assume a PS4 or an Xbox One.
Man, I can't believe they didn't. I can't believe in the reprint, K.A. Applegate didn't write Xbox One. Right. So Jake and Margot hanging out. They bump into just some kid they know from school, I guess, Tobias. And Jake specifically mentions, I think the first time he met him, Tobias's head was in a toilet getting bullied, and Jake kind of saved him. And from that moment on, Tobias sort of thought of him as his friend, I guess.
Yeah, so we already have this, instilling in our brains that even though Jake is super humble about it in the book, he's already a protector. He's already, standing up for human rights in the bathroom.
I thought it was really funny that Tobias's whole introduction to the series, given how important of a character he is, and how much growth he has throughout the series, his introduction is kind of oddly brief, and he only has 2 lines of dialogue, which I thought was kind of funny. His 2 lines of dialogue are, "What's up?" and "So, maybe I'll walk home with you guys." Those are his 2 lines of dialogue, and then it's like, okay, Tobias, join the group. This is an RPG.
Yeah. Well, obviously we're using our foresight, or it's not foresight, it's
foreskin.
We're using our future knowledge of the series to, put bias on this scene.
Tobias.
I think they wanted him to be standoffish, not just in the nerdy sort of way, but they wanted his character to be separate from the main group, and he is right from the beginning.
Oh, and they go to great lengths to stress the fact that, Tobias was always distant, but he just had this look about him, like he was different,
Who would be, staring up at the sky while walking? Like, that's a type of person.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the RPG group expands to 3, and then they move along down the mall and find Jake's cousin Rachel, the hot girl, I guess.
Who I guess is pretty, but I don't think of her that way because she's my cousin.
Right. But Cassie with her is totally Jake's type.
Oh, and I want to talk about this. As we discussed before we started recording, I thought this was pretty forward thinking of K.A. Applegate in '96. It wasn't that taboo for there to be a interracial relationship, but it's still, you still had people out there who were, turning their nose up or bigoted.
Hey, they're not dating or anything yet. I think it's a little early to be pointing something like that out.
Jake flat out says he likes her, which that's going to lead to something. We're setting up a love interest as much as.
All right, we got to get K.A. Applegate on the phone and get her a Pulitzer Prize. You win those for writing things, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, if Animorphs was written today, I think in that scene, Jake would have been a little happier that Tobias wanted to tag along, and that would have been the love interest for the 2000 millennials.
Oh God, you are the worst kind of shipper.
I'm not shipping anything. I'm saying K. Applegate. She's with the times, and she's always looking ahead.
The whole action of this book is literally just the kids at the mall hanging out, and then they decide, oh, let's walk home and take a shortcut through this convenient abandoned construction site. Oh man, I hope any aliens don't show. Oh, wait a minute, the next plot point. Of course, while trudging through this construction site, they just happen to see a magical spaceship up in the sky.
It's nothing magical.
I'm kidding. But it really is a spaceship, and it crashes, and of course, being young children, I think anybody in that situation would probably run towards the crashing alien ship.
I don't know how realistic that'd be, because I'm definitely one of those type of people who, I'll look for the occasional UFO to validate, that belief in my head that something's out there. I want to believe, but who knows? If you actually saw a ship coming, I think I would immediately assume it was just newer technology, like human technology.
Well, yeah, and that that would probably be most people's reaction until, of course, they get up to the ship, and then it opens up and a dying alien comes out that looks something like a blue deer centaur with a giant scorpion tail. I always thought of them as kind of scorpion tails. So they are met by this dying alien, which turns out to be called an Andalite. Very important. Add that to your terminology, your term list.
It's going to come up again.
And in fact, this dying Andalite is probably one of the most important characters in the entire series, and he does get lots of character development in later books. But for right now, we're kind of given the bare bones. He's a dying alien. The Andalite basically just goes on and warns them about the invading alien species called the Yeerks. Pretty much anyone who's read the books know the Yeerks are the main force of evil throughout this series. They're parasitic aliens that enter through your ear canal and control your brain and memories. And the Yeerks have set their sights on Earth, is what the Andalite reveals. So Jake goes into the spaceship, and I like the fact that he actually sees a picture of the Andalite and his family. Not only is that a cool moment to think like, oh, well, the aliens are kind of just like us, they have families and whatnot, but knowing who these characters are that are the Andalite's family for later in the series purposes, it's a cool little Easter egg. Well, anyway, so after Jake retrieves the blue box from the Andalite's ship, the Andalite bestows upon them the ability to acquire animal DNA and then use that to morph into said animals.
Yeah. And this is obviously the crux of the series. I mean, this is the event. And
this is meat and potatoes.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it never really goes into how this technology exists, why it's activated by one person with the morphing technology and passing that through. There's actually a moment later where another character who's yet to be revealed tries to explain it, and they literally blow him off because they're bored. So we never learn anything about this technology for the most part.
So after the teens acquire this morphing technology, that's when the bad guys show up. There's a lot of alien races to commit to memory because they'll be popping up throughout the entire series. We've got taxons that resemble centipedes, except giant and hideous and full of hunger. And after that, we've got Hork-Bajir, which are tall, lizard-like creatures with blades like lawnmowers.
Or salad shooters.
Or salad shooters, whatever. But for right now, let's leave it at taxons, Hork-Bajirs, and Andalites. Speaking of Andalites,
I thought it was unique and pretty cool that the big bad, as he's revealed in his huge blade ship, which is like a big battle axe coming down, he's revealed to be an Andalite, just like the Andalite we just saw. And whereas the first Andalite we were introduced to was someone who smiled with his eyes, and as he was dying, he was noble and heroic. I mean, they say right from the beginning, this guy just feels bad. I mean, he steps down, even though he's got an Andalite body, exactly like the other one. You can tell he's not going to be fun.
Visor 3 actually morphs because being an Andalite, he's got that his host body can do that as well. And that's what makes him such a dangerous enemy, is the fact that he's the only enemy thus far that can morph as well, which he demonstrates right off the bat by morphing into a gigantic creature and eating the dying Andalite. Kind of unnecessary at that point, since, Elfingar's already dying, but...
And this is the first morph we see in the entire series. This is, some huge creature coming out of this other crazy alien, and the kids are, pissing themselves behind a stack of cinder blocks, basically, watching all this unfold.
Yeah. Although I do like how they added in the little section where Jake almost feels compelled to rush in to try and, I don't know what he would do, but I think he says he wants to rush in and punch him or something, punch Visor 3, but
they're kids in a construction site and aliens just showed up, and then now there's death in front of them, and that's the series in a nutshell. I mean, you've got these innocents, going to war.
I think the series in a nutshell is the end of this book, the Yerk Pool, but we'll get to that. What's next is they run like hell from the construction site, not surprisingly, and they are chased a little bit. So the controllers are aware of the fact that there was some kids at the construction site, but they don't know who.
But we have a character who sounds familiar to them shout for their heads.
That would freak the poop right out of me. So after their daring escape from the construction site, we cut to the next morning where Tobias comes over to Jake's house, and Jake is like waking up with almost like a hangover, basically, from the terrible night to his friend Tobias.
And we get one of the many parts of dialogue in this book that I'm just trying to convince myself it was a dream, or, just one of them talking about how the other one's crazy, and then someone morphs in front of somebody else. And
so the first morph between our main group of protagonists here is Tobias to a cat.
I think Jake handles it pretty well. This random nerdy kid turning into a cat in his room.
Basically, all that does is prove to Jake once and for all that this is not only real, but they can, use this power. Like he's figured it out. It's a real thing now. And to prove it, Jake goes ahead and morphs his dog, Homer.
One of the things we skipped over is the fact that Jake's big worry before, aliens invaded his life was he didn't make the junior high basketball team that his brother was a star player on. And he was really worried that Tom, his brother, would be pissed or angry. I never really got what he was worried about, but I guess he was worried Tom would be disappointed that his kid bro didn't follow him into the major leagues of high school basketball, stardom.
Well, that's actually all immediately next, right after Jake morphs the dog. His brother Tom comes in, remember, and he asks, where'd Jake go? And there's a weird moment where he's kind of unnecessarily cruel to a dog, even for a controller, I think. That's what happens. And then we cut to they're having a family dinner, and this is when, like you said, Jake has to tell his brother he didn't make the team. And at first Tom's like, "Oh, what? What are you talking about? I don't even care." And then Tom reveals that he's actually quitting the basketball team, and that is some very alarming behavior as far as Jake is concerned. From there, everybody goes to meet at Cassie's to discuss, the morality and just the plausibility of trying to use their powers to fight the Yerks. They're just debating basically what they should do at this point.
Yeah, and we get another scene of another character not believing, it was anything but a dream, and then Cassie sidles up as a horse.
The first time Marco sees anybody morph is actually Cassie demorphing, and Cassie's apparently very artistic about her morphing. They really make a point to point that out, that she's very skilled at the art of morphing.
I always thought it was funny that they peg her as the best morpher, and she does have this kind of artistic control over her morphs because she likes animals. I mean, it doesn't really... I guess maybe you could argue that she can picture them better. Like she's more empathetic to maybe how an animal feels or looks or muscle structure or whatever. Either way. So yeah, they're conversing in the barn about ethics and stuff.
And while they're standing around to debate this, they hear police sirens, and there's a cop car driving up to Cassie's house midway between morph, and she looks like a freak of nature because every time they morph, it's a several minute process.
Bones breaking and rearranging and organs moving. It's not a beautiful or nice transition. It's an American Werewolf in London transformation. It looks like it should be painful.
The cop shows up, and the whole point of him suddenly appearing is to reveal this information that the cops are looking for some kids that were lighting off firecrackers at a construction site.
Which is a great cover story if you had, 4 alien spaceships land in a wide open space. I think anyone seeing that would immediately think fireworks or, something similar.
But anyway, the cop really just serves to show that, the controllers have already taken over the police force. They've infiltrated, higher ups within human society. So the kids realize this is not going to be as easy as a task as we had thought. And they need to mull it over a bit more.
And that had been one of, Marco's main points, is that they need to find someone who's more in charge or someone with more responsibility than them to tell. And so that you can take it out of their hands. And, seeing that a cop is a controller, that's the definition of authority. So there really is no one but them they can trust.
Yeah, Marco was always very against the idea of them becoming the Animorphs, which ironically is a term that he coins for them. And even though he is very much against them risking their lives in all this, he's just very dedicated to his father after their family has lost their mother not too long ago. That's where his mind's at, is he can't let anything bad happen to him.
Yep.
Later then, back at Jake's house, Tom invites, this is when Jake and Marco are there playing games, and
Sega.
Sega. This is when Tom invites Jake and Marco to a meeting of the sharing, which is another term you can file away in your Animorphs vocabulary. And as soon as Tom does invite them to check out the sharing and leaves, Marco tells him flat out, "I think your brother's a controller," and Jake just up and punches him.
Which is that's kind of cool, because it's I think that's an overreaction in most of our minds, but it's not in this world that they've come to live in. He just basically accused his brother of being, not being his brother. How much more offensive can you get with someone?
Everybody's going to have their slice of tragedy by the end of this series, I'll tell you that.
We call that character development in K. Applegate's books.
So, of course, after they slug it out a little bit and they have their talk, Jake still has his doubts, obviously, and he really, it's more just he doesn't want to believe that his brother's a controller at this point. So I think at this point they tentatively decide on checking out the sharing meeting with the rest of the group. But at this point, Tobias shows up in a brand new slick red-tailed hawk morph, which he just so enjoys.
Oh, he goes on and on and on about how he loves the hawk and how it's just so exhilarating and so much better than his life. And
This is the moment where I'm sure 95% of Animorphs readers learned all about thermals and what thermals are. I never had any idea about thermals until I read the Animorphs series.
Oh yeah, and I will forever, anytime I'm near an ocean or in a parking lot on a hot summer's day, I'll be thinking about those thermals and how great they probably are to the peregrine falcons and red-tailed hawks flying above me.
Thermals. I wish I could pour them into my bowl of cereal in the morning.
It sounds like a bowl of cereal. Like crunchy thermals. Cinnamon toast thermals.
So, Tobias and his hawk morph informs them what he's been up to lately, which is scouring the skies, from the skies to the ground, looking for yerk pools. And I had totally forgotten that this information was revealed in this manner. Basically, before the Andalite Elfangor died at the construction site, he kind of thought beamed Tobias a bunch of information, which, as a writer, it's a little exposition-y for me. So I had totally forgotten that information was delivered in this way, but whatever, shrug, it works. So Tobias basically just informs them that the Yeerks have to feed from what is called Kandrona rays every 3 days, and they do this by leaving their host bodies and entering what's called a Yeerk pool. So he's on the lookout for this Yeerk pool and brings that to the team's attention.
So basically, we get another piece of information as Tobias demorphs in the room after Jake's scolding. Is that, oh yeah, clothes don't morph.
Oh yeah, very important.
So this is the first of many hilarious hijinks of nudity and skin tight clothing.
I always thought, because they do leotards later throughout the series, but did the guys, did they need to wear like a full body leotard, or were the guys just kind of in shorts?
No, the guys wore, they specifically say the guys wore biking shorts and, like, really tight t-shirts.
Right. They should have at least sprung for matching leotards, maybe with, like, the A symbol emblazoned on the chest, you know?
That's Marco's line of thought.
Yeah, so we learn this little slab of information about morphing clothes. And after that, everybody goes to this meeting of the sharing.
I always thought the sharing was a really cool concept for the series because unlike, Invasion of the Body Snatchers or anything like that, we don't just have people, being trapped in rooms with the alien force and then being taken over. We have a Boy Scoutish group set up where the possibility of voluntary hosts, comes about. And so, like they say in this book and others, a Yeerk with a voluntary host has, both the host and him have privileges, and it's just much easier. So the whole idea of this cult / Boy Scout / club, I just thought that was a particular ingenious concept in the series.
Indeed, sir. Well said. Yeah, the sharing, it's full of dicks. I mean, they're out to get young human bodies, all they want.
Yeah. So they get to the sharing and they try to fit in.
Yeah, for the most part, everybody's kind of convinced that they're all normal people and they're not really any problems there.
After Tom's eye twitches at a horrible moment for keeping his cover, Jake morphs into a dog, convinces the others that something's going on. And he checks out this full member meeting happening down the beach.
And comes to find out that the familiar voice he heard at the construction site was none other than their assistant principal, Chapman, who is a prominent, important character for at least the first couple of books.
He's important for quite a few of them. He pops up in and out.
Well, at this point in the book, he's very important. He's like the number one controller at this moment, besides Visor 3. So, yeah, they discover that, their assistant principal, somebody they know and see on a regular daily basis, was the one person who was like, kill these kids and bring me their heads. Very disheartening stuff, and that's ultimately what leads Jake back to his friends, kind of feeling pretty crummy.
And while Jake is sulking as a dog and lets himself go to the dog's happiness, yet again, or at least not yet again, for the first time and not the last, Cassie decides to go check on something in her human form and is discovered. Not full out, but she's definitely noticed by the cop who came by the farm earlier, and it's not a smart move on her part.
So after their wonderful meeting of the sharing, Jake is only further convinced that he's got to take some sort of action. So the idea that they decide upon is for him to morph into a small lizard. And use this morph to follow the assistant principal Chapman in the school and see if they can't find any, pertinent, valuable information to him.
I love the hubris they have at this point because, obviously Marco doesn't have it because he's against everything and he's cynical and everything's going to go wrong and he's 100% right. But I love the fact that their first mission was checking out this whole sharing thing. Went horribly wrong, about as wrong as it could go. And, now they're like, oh, our second mission, Jake's going to morph into a lizard and go check out this. Like, it makes no sense. There's no logic behind it. There's no planning. It's just, I like that. I like that it's just a bunch of really dumb kids playing superhero.
So, as a lizard, Jake kind of loses himself. This is, I think, one of the first times where, well, no, he lost himself as a dog. That's true. But as a lizard, it's considerably different than losing yourself.
It's a constant occurrence throughout the series, but this is the first time we see what they call, a prey animal and how overpowering its instincts can be.
Right, yeah. So immediately Jake takes off down the hall and he does things that are no one in their right mind, a human, would do, like eat a spider, and he ends up losing his tail. Somebody steps on it and it pulls off of his body. Lizards are able to do that.
Luckily, the shoe that tore off his tail happened to be Assistant Principal Chapman.
Oh, right. So, yeah, from there on, he's able to follow him into a... I thought this was weird. It's like a janitor's closet, I guess, at the school that basically just has a door in there that leads to the Yerk pool. But he doesn't actually go down into the Yerk pool right now. The screams from all the people shouting for help kind of deter him from that. And in fact, I think he goes on to have nightmares about that.
Oh yeah, I mean it's the first description of a Yerk pool from someone who didn't even go down into it. It sounded a lot like what he thought hell would sound like.
Yeah, and that's very much how I imagined it would be.
Yeah, but they still don't, as we see later, they don't have any concept of what it really is, or they would have never, planned to go down there. I just
don't think they expected the size and scope of the whole operation. I think they were literally expecting like maybe a swimming pool, but
which I don't blame them completely for. I mean, the entrance is in their school. How big could it be?
Yeah, exactly. So after discovering the location to the Yerk pool, I think they might have gotten a little bit of a confidence booster from that, because now the team decides it's time to acquire some battle morphs. And I had truly forgotten how fun and funny this little section of this book is.
Yeah, it's our first trip to the gardens, which is like a Busch Gardens,
Yeah, I always thought of it as Busch Gardens.
Yeah, roller coasters, a wildlife zoo, and all mixed together. So Cassie's mom works at the gardens, so she can get in for free, where the others have to pay a discounted price or something.
And at this point, I was wondering, well, why didn't they just morph birds and fly in like they do later in the series when they're smarter?
Well, I think they're still pretty unfamiliar with morphs, and it's not their natural instinct to think, oh, what morph are we going to use to get into somewhere? They just
not yet, but the name of the series.
Yeah, right now they're just like, oh, we have to go to the gardens. Let's hop on the bus.
Yeah, right. So that's what they do. And within the bus ride away, they are walking through the behind-the-scenes areas of the gardens on their way to acquire some big animals. And the first one that they encounter is a gorilla. And I don't know who at this point was intending on acquiring it, but Marco is the one who ends up acquiring it.
Well, they make a little joke on how Jake, he says, he's worried about Marco in general just being on board the Animorphs. So he makes a little joke of saying he knows how to handle Marco. So he tells Marco he should, sit this one out. And Marco's like, what? No. He jumps in immediately to get the...
Well, I really like the next part where Jake ends up acquiring a tiger through a very unfortunate set of circumstances. They basically get chased all around the gardens.
Yeah, we get into a Three Stooges sequence. The guards show up and they immediately take off and run, and they split up. Jake's decision, probably one of his first leader moments, of telling them to split up from the security, guards. And they run into a tiger. Him and Marco run into a tiger enclosure and do not realize it until it's basically sitting on their ass.
Yeah, that was great. But Jake does manage to acquire it safely. And knowing that when they acquire an animal, it becomes docile for roughly 10 seconds, I think that'd give me a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, and they found that out earlier, so it's probably the only thing that saved them.
After they get their battle morphs, Jake and Marco, they meet up with everybody else who had zero trouble getting away from the guards and acquiring their own animal battle morphs.
Which we don't find out what they are yet.
Nope. So after acquiring their battle morphs, basically everyone meets up later, and at this point they discover that Cassie has been captured. Oh no.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so weird with this first book is a lot of these weird kind of contrivances of, events that just move the plot forward, like Cassie being captured and Tobias getting thought-beamed information, really don't show up throughout the rest of the series, at least not this blatantly. Just in this first book, they move the plot forward with some kind of random sequences.
Yeah, they definitely take a couple of shortcuts as far as writing goes, but I think, when you're writing for kids, and especially if you're trying to reach this certain amount of page numbers or whatever, you do have to keep the plot moving,
Yeah, I guess.
Well, so after they discover that Cassie's been captured, that basically spurns them into this whole final act sequence where Jake is like, all right, we gotta go.
Yeah, they were going to go to the Yerk pool anyway, but Cassie being captured puts, a time limit on it, so.
Yeah, and it basically makes it so that they can't back out now. Now they have personal stake in it.
Yeah, so they arrive at the school, they find they find an open window, and what else could go wrong? Tobias shows up in morph.
Yeah, already morphed, ready to go. Who knows how long he's been like that at that point. The team essentially is in this situation where Cassie's being dragged off. They're not 100% prepared, but I don't think they ever really could be prepared for what they're about to see. So they go into this the door down to the Yerk pool that they discovered, and it is probably like the closest description you could be to actual like hell in a biblical sense. Just so many people crying and terrified and totally utterly defeated, just people in cages all over the place, and not just humans, but they mention that there's the Hork-Bajir and there's the Taxons, there's all the alien species there. This is quite literally like home base for the Yerks at this moment. This is their Yerk pool, and it is gigantic. He says it's bigger than the mall at one point.
Oh yeah, he says basically you could fit a few Super Bowls in there, and then the mall and their school on top of it.
So it's probably close to the size of their entire town, I would say.
This is the first time they truly despair at how insignificant the 5 of them are, especially with, they have Morgan powers, they have all that, but any alien race or just anyone in general who could build some humongous cavern underneath a town completely unnoticed. I mean, this is when they first realize what they're really dealing with.
Right, yeah, and they even mentioned that there's a bunch of there's construction equipment down there, Earth construction equipment, which just seems out of place with how terrible and alien this place that they're at appears to be.
Yeah, which is basically a huge cavern, tons of shacks and little office buildings and things around it, a cafeteria, all these, aliens and human controllers alike running around, cages with screaming humans, and then the giant pool itself, filled with what they described as molten lead, looking liquid, and then 2 steel piers going out into the middle of the lake with lines of people on them.
After entering this terrible, god-awful place, and being able to blend in at least somewhat, for the time being, they managed to spot Cassie being dragged by the police officer towards the Yerk pool, the pillars that you mentioned, and
not pillars, the piers.
Piers, not pillars, piers.
Yeah, she's being dragged up one of the piers, which one is for offloading your Yerk as a controller, and then your host is taken to the cages, and then the one that Cassie's being dragged to is where you would be dunked into the molten lead-looking water, and Yerk would enter forcibly into your ear.
So when they see Cassie, they finally they get eyes on her. Tobias proves his usefulness by, being able to keep an eye on her with his hawk vision, which is quite exceptional. And they just witness the processes, of a person dumping a Yerk out of their head and then immediately just starting to scream and cry and shout at them for mercy and for them to let her go, and that, she's a free person and all that.
There's a great moment too where they notice the cafeteria and the eateries and places where you see Hork-Bajir and controllers milling about, but you also see a special section where voluntary hosts are waiting for their Yerk to finish, sucking up Kandrona rays. And there's just this great moment where Jake, who knows Tom is down there somewhere, he, asks Tobias, who has this great vision, like we said, is he one of the voluntary hosts or is he in the cages? And Tobias is like, yeah, he's in the cages, screaming his head off. So just a little insight that Tom.
I don't know why he would have thought his brother was a voluntary controller.
Well, I just think it's just a fear. I mean, like, if his brother was a voluntary host, then he had no idea who he was. I mean, at that point, you're not even family. I mean, that's just. Well, that's a real fear, I would say.
Yeah, but they didn't even know that voluntary hosts were a thing until they got there. Which it's kind of hard to even imagine why anyone would do that to themselves voluntarily, but...
Well, no, they make a good point later on of, a lot of the voluntary hosts, there's tons of people out there who are just willing to give up control to be a part of something. Or might even just think it's cool, they don't realize the horror of what they're agreeing to, and then just go along with it. There's some weak people out there.
Jake sees Cassie about to be, downloaded with a Yerk, and obviously that's not going to happen. So this is kind of the huge climax of this book here. Everybody goes battlemorphs, and this is where we get to see Marco's first time as a gorilla, Jake's first time as a tiger, and Rachel unveils her battlemorph, which is an elephant. It's quite surprising. I didn't really see that coming. In fact, I thought her first battlemorph was the grizzly, but that doesn't come till later in the series.
And it's a funny moment where they go behind a shed and they're like, okay, let's go battlemorphs, and they're immediately found by a controller who walks along.
They're quite immediately found out, but not that it really matters, because they basically have to go ballistic to save Cassie here. And they're just taking anyone and everyone out in their path to do so.
Yeah, once they start causing chaos, they start opening... Marco, with his gorilla morph, starts opening cages. Cassie goes hoarse for some reason. I guess she doesn't have that many morphs. But did she not go anything at the gardens? Did she not get anything at the gardens?
Apparently not.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe she thought she'd have more time to collect a proper battle morph. I don't know.
I can get into the gardens for free, so I can just go back there and get a battle morph whenever I want.
Well, yeah, she doesn't have to pick a battle morph, with the commoners and the riffraff. She can do it behind the scenes later.
Yeah, so Cassie goes hoarse and is basically worthless from that point on in the entire series.
Well, she doesn't go hoarse just quite yet. I mean, she gets saved by everybody first, and then they have to kind of at least make sure they're out of eyeshot, a little bit before she can morph.
But anyway, so yeah, they're all in battle morph. They're fighting. Cassie's a horse. Tom is out of his cage. They're feeling pretty good at this point. They're ready to go. And
Visor 3 shows up.
And this is where we get our first Andalite Bandits reference, right?
Yes. Well, here's the thing. This is basically the point of the series where either the Animorphs will all die horribly and become, either dead or controllers themselves, or what actually happens, Visor 3 is a dumbass. And he does several things to pretty much ensure his failure here. He makes the assumption that the Animorphs are Andalites. He never really considers that they could be human, though at this point, to be fair, yes, at this point, he wouldn't have a reason to suspect that. But still, when your successful human mining operation starts to have some opposition, you want to analyze it a little bit more than jump to assumption.
You have to think that, it might not even be standard procedure to carry around a Escafil morphine device on your, fighter.
Yeah, and I don't think they knew that Elfangor had the morphing technology on him at the moment, or could have even given it away to any humans. He ultimately displays just a poor choice of a morph to ensure his success, I think, anyway. A giant 8-headed fire-breathing creature. It's certainly maybe effective battle morph, but in terms of, stopping these 4 or 5 various Andalite bandits in one fell swoop, he kind of falls short on that area.
I feel like Visor 3 has a bunch of morphs. Obviously, he's traveled around the universe, gathering these insane morphs. I feel like he read about them in a book, and he's never tried any of them out because, he can kill anything, any known controller with his tail. So, I'm sure he's not morphing every 5 seconds. He scares a lot of people with his morphs throughout the series.
No, he's not like the Animorphs. He's not using his morphs for, reconnaissance and information gathering and stuff like that. He's solely using them for fighting, for killing, really.
This could be the first time he ever morphed that. So if I can side with Visor 3 a little bit on this. If I had this morph and I knew about it and I had, sat up late at night, giggling to myself about all its crazy weapons and stuff, I would think an 8-headed monster that shoots fireballs out of its mouth would be he'd have a good shot at killing a tiger, an elephant, and a horse.
He would, but probably I think the thing that did him in is, since I would assume he has less experience with morphs than, Andalites or even the Animorphs later, I would think that this crazy-ass alien's instincts probably took over, and he, I think, maybe lost himself a little bit.
That's a really good point. No, that's a really good point. I don't think I've ever thought about Visor 3's animal instincts taking over before.
Yeah, because I don't know where he'd get the time to practice a morph like that anywhere. I mean, I guess maybe he could do it up on the Yerk pool ship, but probably not.
They call that Friday up there on the Yerk mothership.
So after Visor 3 goes ahead and transforms into the most unnecessary creature for stopping several animals, the Animorphs obviously escape. They get Cassie back, and they lead the charge of freed humans in Hork-Bajir, and Tom is there. It's a very triumphant moment. Everyone's escaping, everyone's running, everyone's happy. Well, happy as they can be in that situation. And, it seems like they're about to escape, and by the time they reach the exit, their numbers are just, they're nothing. They have one person. Cassie managed to save one person, and that's only because that person held on like hell and rode Cassie out of there. And Cassie was a horse, so it's not weird.
Nope. I do want to take a moment and bring up I don't know if I would say it's incredibly dark, but I think it could be construed as that, where they get out, they're safe, they're talking, and Jake's, narrating for us about what happened in the, the coming days after the Yerk pool and how nightmares they're having and all that. And it talks about how Cassie told them that the police officer who took her down there wasn't a problem anymore. So, did Cassie straight up murder a police officer?
Well, during all that chaos and everything within the Yerk pool, I'm sure, so the dude probably, fucking got hit by a Dracon beam or something during all the chaos.
I'm sure he got hit by a fireball, or Rachel accidentally stepped on him or something, or on purpose stepped on him. But I love to think that on their way out, before Cassie went hoarse, she jumped on this guy's back and snapped his neck.
Oh, okay. I'd like to think that as a horse, Cassie just straight up ate the guy.
Yeah, they're all fighting. Jake's swiping at people, Hork-Bajir left and right, blades flying. In the background, Cassie's just slowly eating a police officer as a horse.
So there's really only one more little plot point to the book. We get to the next morning, and I always thought it was messed up how Jake has to go home, and he lays in bed in his house, and he's got to deal with Tom again, who's there.
Yeah, well, he witnessed true horror. I mean, something that most of us will never do in our lifetimes. And so he's laying in bed. It's dark. He's getting ready to go to sleep and have all these nightmares about the Yerk pool. And his brother shows up, not in his room, but he hears him come home.
The next morning, we get a great cliffhanger ending for the book. Jake is woken up by a tapping on his window, and it's, of course, a red-tailed hawk, whom he lets in, and it's Tobias. And guess who stayed in their morph for longer than 2 hours, which, if you've been paying attention, is the time limit for how long they can stay in morph. Anything over 2 hours, and they're trapped forever, which is now the case for Tobias.
I think if I were Tobias and I was in the rafters, I know security has probably been ramped up after an attack on the Yerk pool, and Visitor 3 is still running around, probably eating and setting things on fire. If I knew I was getting close to that 2 hour limit, I would still, up there in the rafters, hang on to something and try to, morph back to human so I'm not trapped. But I guess maybe there's just, too many eyes.
I just imagine it's like he could have been anywhere. He could have been underneath a little bed in the controller section, So after Tobias basically reveals himself trapped in hawk morph to Jake, the book just kind of abruptly ends. And I think it was a great ending. It definitely made me want to grab number 2 and rip it apart.
No, I love the ending to the invasion, because it's Jake. He knows Tobias is trapped. He even says so in his head, but he's still like, Tobias, come on, demorph. Stop joking around. And Tobias is like, well, I guess this is me now. And it's just like, Applegate, I know you needed to make this whole time limit thing real, but you just trapped a kid in a bird for the rest of the series in the first book.
So I think it's no surprise that both of us highly regard this book as, one of the great books of not just this series, but,
No. You're getting ahead of yourself. I think now we can talk just a little bit about it. We've been going on pretty long for this being the first episode, but I think we should take a moment each, and like we'll do at the end of every book, probably more so in depth with the next ones as we get used to the format and how long we can get through just talking about the books. But I think we can separately kind of give a little mini review of what we thought. I mean, this is the first book. This sets the tone for the rest of the series. Did you like it?
Did I like it? Yes, I loved it. Out of a possible, I would say, for a rating system, out of a possible
10 zeros, how many zeros do you rate it?
10 of them. I don't know what rating system we'll come up with eventually, but I would give this the highest markings an Animorph book could get. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, I give this 10 out of 10 zero spaces. This is as a first book in a series, it's great. It establishes everything. The exposition isn't too horrible in setting up the universe. A couple goofy parts, but you really get I think a real sense of reality with these kids just being absolutely horrible decision makers, jumping into this way too soon, not planning anything, not practicing anything.
Well, jumping into war.
Yeah. But as a book itself, I mean, the best thing about it is the structure. I mean, it's perfect as far as like moving from event to event, and then getting their battle morphs, and earlier Cassie meeting a police officer who's going to come back, and it's very well thought out in the outline stage or however they wrote it. But I was really impressed with the structure, and if they do make a movie or adapt this again into a new television series, I mean, don't try to put your own mark on it. I mean, this would right away, it'd be straight ready to go into a screenplay. I mean, it's perfectly formatted already.
Yeah, I think maybe they just need to work on a little bit of the transitions flowing together in terms of film, but as a book, yeah, it all works great.
And and they need to take into account the rest of the series somewhat. One thing I liked about my reprint that I read for the first time with this one is the fact that when we have Elfangor and Visor 3 meet at the beginning of the book, Visor 3 says, nice to see you again, instead of nice to meet you or something. Because obviously later in the series, it's revealed that they have a past. So I really appreciated that as a fan of the series, reading this again for almost the sixth or seventh time reading this first book, if not more than that. It's been recanonized.
But no, great book. Can't wait to read the rest of the series.
It's already been difficult. It's going to be even more difficult to not just blow through the series, especially when we start getting to the books we haven't read. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm such a big fan of the series, and I know it so well, and I know the universe so well, and how it ends, and all the Chronicle books. I mean, it blows my mind that I never tried to read so many of the books I've never read before.
Yeah. There's definitely quite a few that I just really don't even know what to expect.
I hope you enjoyed listening to us ramble and dissect.
Oh, please enjoy it.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I hope that we get better. we're fans of podcasts, and we're huge fans of Animorphs. We were already doing this before we decided to have a podcast, just constantly talking about the mythology and the universe and concepts.
Yeah, it was basically the whole idea stemmed from, hey, we like talking about things. We're kind of good at it. We should just record it.
Yeah. And I constantly listen to podcasts at work and on set and stuff. So it seemed like the smart thing to do. And there's not really, I mean, there's some great reviews and essays out there, but from what I've seen, there's no other podcast. So, why not?
And I'm really excited about having being a part of the Animorphs community on Reddit, which is still quite active, surprisingly, for a series that ended, very long ago.
That speaks to the series. I mean, this series, obviously, we're adults that aren't, crazy introverted or socially awkward or anything like that for the most part, and
right.
somewhat. And we still talk about this series.
Yeah, and just from browsing all the main topics at r/Animorphs on Reddit, I can see that the Animorphs fan base and community is still very active and still very passionate about the books, which was another big incentive for us doing this podcast, is just because it seems like everybody just loves talking about Animorphs.
Hopefully you enjoyed the podcast, and we're going to definitely continue whether you listen or not.
Oh, and in the future, we would like to do like a not necessarily a Q&A session at the end, but we'd like to read listener emails. let us know if you disagree with what we're talking about. If we give any wrong information, feel free to call us out on that. Actually, probably don't do that.
Yeah, you keep that to yourself. But yeah, we'll try our best to be the fans you want us to be, and to keep discussion lively and entertaining.
We will try to be the podcasters you deserve and the ones you need. Batman reference.
But yeah. So we'll have emails in the future. We'll have audience interaction. I hear it's popular nowadays with the kids. So that's the podcast. I hope you listen to us next time. And I'm Coleman.
Oh, and I'm Mitch.
Join us next week when we review the second book in the Animorphs series, which is The Visitor. So thanks again.